5 miles. And so we had free access to all the city as long as the Viet Cong weren't taken over, which they did a little bit later, kept us out of town for quite a while. In fact, they kept us locked in the hotel for a month nearly. We had a couple of guys would always stay at the airfield, and the rest of us would go home at night, and it rotated off, and in case there were emergency flights at night. And so we got stuck in there until the supplies were running low, and then they started airlifting the more critical jobs like ours was one that considered they'd send a helicopter in and pick us out of there. But we had the hotel was built in a circle with a square, built in a square city block with a plaza in the middle of it with fountains and all the beautiful stuff. And it had balconies on on both sides. There was a hallway down the middle. Part of the rooms open to the inside and part to the outside, and we just happened to be in the room that was right over top of the archway, the main entrance to the hotel plaza, which made us the first place they would hit if they were trying to break in. And the plan was for defense. There was sandbags and concertina wire and all that kind of stuff, but they would hit the building, and we were supposed to be out on the balcony, doing our part of fending it off. And the comforting part was if we get shot, the guys in the other room were supposed to come into the hallway and wait for us to get shot, and they would come out and take the position. But none of us in our room ever got hit. So, but they did keep us pinned down there for a while.
When you did have access and things to that area, did you get to go to the beach and swim or anything like that?
I learned to water ski in Vietnam, and the USO had speedboats, motorboats, and water skis, and I don't suppose we did it more than a half dozen times, and maybe not even that much, because we didn't have much free time. It was long. In fact, I went a year without having a day off. Until I guess somebody, the platoon leader or something, realized I'd never taken an R&R or a day off, and I'd take parts of days off, like I went to the Bob Hope show when it was in town and that sort of stuff. But anyway, they sent me off to Thailand for 4 days on a cargo plane to get a break, and then I went to, just before I left, I went to Hong Kong for a week of R&R, and then I came home after I got my rest. And that's why I didn't go after the E5 strike, because when I got back they had an E5 strike waiting for me, but I had to go back down to halfway down in Vietnam to Nha Trang to pick it up. And it I'd been stuck down there for 2 weeks trying to get home after I came back from Hong Kong. Couldn't get a flight out because it was so busy that I kept getting bumped off.
Did you know how long you were going to be in Vietnam?
It was a 1-year tour, and I just volunteered for 2 extra months in order to get out early when I came back. If you got to the States with less than 90 days left on your enlistment, they'd just go ahead and let you out. So I had volunteered for an extra 2 months, and I got back to the States with 2.5 months left.
All right. Do you have any personal feelings about the conflict as a whole?
Well, it turned out to be a political thing, just like what we're about to get into in the East here. I don't think we ever lost a battle, We lost the war because we walked away from it. And there were times when we would have orders that you couldn't shoot back. It was Johnson would call a ceasefire, and there were times when you could only shoot back if they shot at you first. And you can't run a war when you're doing that sort of thing. The reason for the war, in my mind, was legitimate, although there was some controversies of whether Johnson started it or not. But the idea of the domino effect was that was the stated policy of Russia, and China was not a close ally of theirs, but they were both trying to get the same communist type governments installed. And China was obviously trying to grab peace at a time and take the world one country at a time. So I think the reason for it was legitimate. The way it was conducted was illegitimate.
Okay. How long after the war, or after you got back from Vietnam, was you able to talk about it?
Oh, I didn't have any trouble talking about it. I don't talk about it. Still don't talk about it much. It's not that I'm not sure how you explain those emotions. for one thing, people that don't do that sort of thing don't understand it very clearly. And at that time in the U.S., there was that anti-war thing developing.
Mm-hmm.
So you weren't coming home as a hero, you were coming home as something less, you know. All of my friends, when we were working in South America, flying down there with the missions, all of the missionaries that were my age had protested the war. I was the only one there that had actually gone to the war, which I kind of rubbed in their face a time or two when they would start pushing their side of the view. You know? But it was a friendly competition we had. But so it's just not anything to necessarily talk about, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What was your opinion of your officers?
They were pretty decent. They understood the fact that we were there to do a job. And the nice thing about working like we did as closely with pilots that we did, as we were mechanics then, and since then I've been both, but they didn't want to offend you because you're the guy that fixed the airplane they were about to climb into.
Yes.
You know? And that was very obvious and very real. And so we got along. We actually went out partying sometimes together, even though I think there's some military rules against that. But I was in Germany trying to get a leave of absence, a delay en route they called it, to go stop here for 30 days to see Kathy and my family on the way to Vietnam. I was trying to work that out so I didn't have to use up leave time, but when she took a leave of absence and made a specific date, my transfer papers didn't come through, so I had to use up a leave. They transferred me to Vietnam, sent all my stuff to Vietnam while I was here. But they sent the orders, my orders, to the wrong place, so I went back to Germany, and instead of saying, welcome back, they said, can we have your car, and you're supposed to be in Vietnam. You know? So I left a beautiful Mercedes-Benz, 1951 Mercedes over there with those guys to run around in. But my things never caught up with me. All of my clothes, all my military stuff, my civilian things. I was over there a year. If I hadn't extended the 2 months, I would have never gotten it. But it finally caught up with me just before I came home. So I didn't have a uniform except one Class B uniform. And never stood a formation in Vietnam once I got to my unit. It was very non-military in a lot of ways. The gun I carried, it was a little Danish Madsen 9mm submachine gun. I was issued and had an M14, but it was so big and bulky to carry around in a Jeep or an airplane that I carried a little gun, and that wasn't even a U.S. issue gun, you know, but nobody didn't mind. It's if you're doing your job, everything is fine. Okay.
Were you aware of any of the pilots that had been promoted from the ranks? It wouldn't have worked that way with pilots, would it?
Oh yeah, it did. Yeah, we had one guy that had been a sergeant, got promoted, got a battlefield promotion, and then went back and got his flight training. Yeah. I see. And we had some warrant officers that's kind of halfway between an enlisted and an officer. We had some of those. And our platoon leader was a captain, and our company commander was a major, who later got shot down and killed.
Okay. Was there any difference that you'd express between the ones that had been promoted and schooled officers?
We had a couple West Pointers that took a little while to get over themselves, I think. And we had I didn't eat very often in a military mess because they paid us, because we were living in a hotel, they paid us to eat anywhere we wanted. Rations not available pay, plus quarters pay and a whole lot of other things. But when I did eat in one of the tents, it was a military restaurant there. The lieutenant in there, I just enjoyed harassing him because it was easy to get under his skin. And he tried to get me busted once. He called up to our captain to tell him what a nasty and unrespectful person I was. But because of the relationship we had up there, the guy just called me in and he said, "Hey, they're giving me a hard time here. You know, stop eating there." But that was as far as I went with that.
Okay. Did you work personally with any foreign nationals?
Yes, I mean we had a private maid in our room, a very sweet young lady, and her grandfather worked out at the airfield with us just as a kind of he kept the office clean and did those kind of things. But and we had Arvins that I don't remember any of them well enough to say they were personal friends. I mean, we knew them and they were there and hung around. that were observers that sometimes flew in the back of the plane with, and did the observation.
Mm-hmm.
Had some good friends downtown that worked in bars mostly,
Mm-hmm.
but some of them spoke pretty good English because they learned it in order to get along with GIs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have any comments about any of the activities you participated in at night?
You mean party activities or war activities?
Either or.
Yeah. We did. The only thing we got at night, was after were stuck in a hotel and had to be lifted out by helicopter. And, we moved into tents out near the airfield, and at night we'd get harassment fire, tracers.
Mm-hmm.
And Viet Cong would set up and shoot down into the tents from up on the little rises around it, and they were pretty far out, so they weren't actually shooting at Indian individuals necessarily, but they could put a lot of tracers through your tent in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
And I only spent I think I spent one night in a bunker on the fence, and
Mm-hmm.
one night in a foxhole, but for the most part, the war was kind of out there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't need to talk much about the parties, no sense in incriminating myself.
Okay. All right. I know you'd mentioned the dust. Is there any other observations that you guys had with the mud and the dust?
It was there. The dirtiest I've ever been in my life is one of our planes got shot down as we were stuck in town, and the Viet Cong had pretty much ruled the town for about a month before we pushed them back out.
Uh-huh.
And they came in and got us with a helicopter, and then that same day one of our planes got shot down and managed to glide over to the sand near the beach, not on the beach, but back over the dunes. And so I went out to hook it up to a helicopter that we called in to get it. And helicopters churn up a lot of dust, sand, dirt, everything that's sticks and weeds and everything else when they're hovering low, like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that particular helicopter was loaded with fuel because they normally fly way out there someplace to pick up the plane. We were half a mile off the end of the runway at this point, so he'd pick up the helicopter after we hooked it up, and he couldn't carry it. He starts stalling his rotor blades, so he'd have to set it back down and go off and burn off some fuel and come back a half an hour later. We did that, I think, 4 times before he managed to get light enough to carry the thing back. But the sand and everything, every time he's doing that, it's packing in my ears, and it's just a disgusting amount of filth that you get into.
Mm-hmm.
And he was having a hard time hovering at times. At one point, I was up on the land on top of the wing trying to reach this thing. I didn't intend to be laying there, but he kept drifting, and he set the helicopter down across one of the skids on my belly, on my stomach, between the wing and his skid. And his crew chief lay on their belly inside the helicopter talking to the pilot, telling him up and down, left, right, a little bit, whatever. And I could see him screaming at the pilot, but it took the pilot a while to get that thing off, and it was just about all I could, pressure-wise, all I could handle.
Mm-hmm.
Normally I didn't get into a position where they could do that to me, but that time I did.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger fear was that somebody would shoot the helicopter down while you're right there under the thing,
Mm-hmm.
But I should, or I could, I don't know if I need to, but point out, but when we'd go out like that, the guys were souvenir takers in some outfits. I mean, there was a group that put the perimeter around us one time that we sit out there and visited with for a while, waiting for the helicopter to come in and pick up the airplane. That they would have like ears, a necklace of ears that they'd slice off as souvenirs for the people in shot. And I've run into guys that had the helmets we had the cloth over them with the little slits in like buttonholes to stick twigs in if you wanted to camouflage yourself, and have everyone would have a different little piece of scalp hanging out of it where they would take it, and fingers. I saw a guy that had fingers on a strung up on the thing. So that sort of thing I don't think would go on in the military nowadays.